Good morning, everybody. I kind of like to give you nice things to look at while maybe you're drawing or coloring or whatever you're doing while you're listening to the story. So these are my lilacs. It's kind of in the sun, but my lilac bushes are in full bloom this morning. So I'm going to continue reading. We got cut off last night. I think it was because my phone was going dead. Excuse me, I'm still waking up. So Bill had just given his dad the note, and he ran as fast as he could back to the barn. Then I walked through the barn and out another door and went back to hoeing potatoes just as hard as I could with my back to the cornfield so I couldn't see. I was singing, "Nearer, my God, to thee, nearer to thee." And I changed one part of the chorus and sang, "Still all my soul should be." I forgot how the tune goes. "Nearer, my God, to thee." Pretty soon, in about 10 minutes maybe, I heard somebody coming, but I didn't stop to look up. Instead, my heart beat faster and faster, and I didn't even turn around. Then somebody called my name. But it was Mom's voice, and she told me it was too hot to work so fast and that I ought to rest a while. But I didn't feel like resting. I looked across the field to where Dad was, and he was plowing away just as if I hadn't given him the note. Maybe he didn't even see it, I thought. Or maybe he doesn't care. Maybe he won't ever like me again. Pretty soon, Mom called, "I'd like to have a pail of cold spring water for making iced tea for the missionary circle." I'd forgotten all about the meeting. I looked quickly to see if there were any cars out front of our house, and there weren't, but I knew they'd be coming soon. I took our big gallon thermos jug and went through the woods to the spring, hoping none of the gang would be there, because I didn't want them to see how sad I felt. But no one was there. I filled up the jug to the top and let it stand a while so the jug itself would get cool. In a few minutes, I'd pour out that water and fill it again and take it back to Mom. While I waited, I went to the creek and looked at the lazy little bubble clusters of foam that floated on the surface. Sugar Creek looked lazy and very sad. In fact, everything looked sad. The whole world needed rain, I thought. Just that minute, a rain crow started crying, "Caw, caw, cook, cook." Rain crows always nearly make the most noise when the weather is cloudy or wet. But maybe he felt sad today, too, as though there were clouds inside of him. He certainly sounded unhappy. I picked up a flat rock and skipped it across the creek. It struck the water with a splash, made a big leap, and then actually skidded on the top of the water all the way across. The waves it made looked kind of like a boy's sad face breaking into a smile. That was the first time I'd ever thought about old Sugar Creek smiling, but he did it just the same. I started to pick up another rock when I happened to think of the rock I'd thrown at our old red rooster, so I dropped it, disgusted. 4 cars were parked in front of our house when I came back with spring water. I didn't want anyone to see me, so I set down the jug on our kitchen table and hurried out to the garden. I started hoeing potatoes again just as my dad came in from the field. Dad went straight to the tool house and got a hoe, and in a moment we were hoeing side by side, neither of us saying anything. Pretty soon, Dad said, "Thank you, Bill, for bringing me a drink. It was very thoughtful of you." I kept on hoeing, not saying anything. Then I looked up quick, and there were tears in Dad's eyes. And the next thing I knew, I'd made a dive for him like a football player makes a tackle, only it was around his neck instead. Well, I won't tell you what happened just then, but I'll bet I felt even better than the prodigal son did in the Bible when his father hugged him and kissed him and everything was all right between them. Then my dad told me something every Christian in the world ought to know, and that is, the very minute you know you've done something wrong, you ought to be sorry for it. And if you confess it to God, He will forgive you right that minute. The blood of Jesus washes our heart cleaner than the best soap in the world can wash a boy's dirty hands. When Dad had gone back to the field again, it seemed the most wonderful thing in the world to be alive, and I actually liked to hoe potatoes. The sky was the prettiest blue you ever saw. The heat waves dancing above the corn seemed a lot like a lot of happy boys dancing for joy, or else like the waves splashing in Sugar Creek when you go swimming. From away across the field, I could hear somebody whistling a cheery tune, and it was my great big dad whistling Home Sweet Home. Even though I knew he couldn't hear me, I started whistling the same tune with him, and it was the happiest duet I'd ever whistled in my whole life. Chapter 6. Wow, I thought we were in Chapter 3. That night we lost another pig, and I knew something would have to be done about it. The next afternoon, the gang planned to go up into the hills to see Old Man Paddler. We had decided to go through the swamp instead of going around it as we usually did. We knew about a mulberry tree not far from Old Man Paddler's cabin where there were luscious thumb-sized mulberries just waiting for a boy to climb the tree and pick them. Old Man Paddler was a very rich, long-whiskered, kind man who had just come back from a trip around the world. He lived up in the hills alone and got so lonesome when we didn't go up to see him. As usually when our gang was together, we sounded a lot like a bunch of blackbirds as well as a zoo full of monkeys. We trudged along, taking turns walking and running and playing leapfrog and rolling in the grass. I had my binoculars along, fastened to a strap around my neck. Poetry was puffing as he always does. Circus was just the same old circus, except he seemed to like Little Jim better than ever, and I noticed that in his pocket he had the New Testament that our pastor had given him that night. All of us were learning to carry New Testaments so that when we grew up, we'd have one in our pocket instead of a package of stinking old cigarettes. Poetry's dad figured it up one day, and he saved $200 a year by not smoking. So every year, he sent $200 to help a national missionary in Africa. Just think of all the saved people that'll be in heaven because of that. We stopped to rest at the old sycamore tree and to talk about different things. So many important things had happened there. About that time, Dragonfly started acting mysteriously, and all of a sudden he began climbing the tree. He couldn't climb nearly as fast as Circus, and it was a hard tree to climb, but pretty soon he had reached the first limb. Nobody was paying any attention to him except me, but I thought he had the strangest expression on his face. All of us were talking and chattering and tumbling over each other in the grass. Pretty soon I heard Dragonfly grunt, and he came sliding down the tree trunk with that same look on his face. For a moment there was an expression in his eye like Old Man Paddler had sometimes. Then he began playing and acting like the rest of us. All through the swamp I kept thinking about bears and using my binoculars to see if I could see one. When we came to the place where Dragonfly had seen the big black hog wallowing in the mud, if it was a hog, we all stopped and examined the ground carefully to see if there were any bear tracks. But there weren't, that we could see, and nothing had been there since that other time. Just the same, I sighed when we came out on the other side of the swamp and started to climb the hill towards Old Man Paddler's cabin. In about 20 minutes we were there. It was an old log cabin, looking kind of like the picture of the cabin Lincoln was born in. We stopped at the spring where the old man gets his drinking water, each one of us taking turns drinking, lying down on our stomachs and drinking like cows. Pretty soon we saw the old man himself standing in the doorway with his white whiskers reaching almost down to his waist. He had so many whiskers you couldn't tell whether he was smiling. You had to look into his eyes to find out, but he always had a twinkle in those eyes. That kind old man invited us in and made us drink sassafras tea, as he always does when we go to see him. While we were sitting around listening to him tell us stories, some of us were sitting on chairs, some on the floor. He surprised us by saying something that made us feel very sad. "Boys," he said in a trembling old voice, "I'm not going to live very much longer in this world. Last week I went to town and made a will, and in that will I left something for each one of you. I haven't forgotten that it was you who saved my life a month ago and my money too." That must have been book 1. Little Jim looked away quickly because he always liked old people so well, especially Old Man Paddler. None of us knew what to say. Finally, Big Jim cleared his throat and said courteously, "Thank you, Mr. Paddler. We're glad we had a chance to be your friends. You helped us boys a great deal." Then the old man stood and said, "I must be getting on with my work now, but be sure to come again soon." He didn't tell us what his work was, and we didn't ask, but we were all curious. We went outdoors and down to the spring for another drink. When little Jim had had his drink, I noticed tears in his eyes. While we were on our way up to the mulberry tree, he and I walked together, and I asked, what's the matter? He took a hard swish with a long bull thistle with his stick before he answered, "I don't want Old Man Paddler to die." Well, I didn't either. Of course, I couldn't help wondering what he'd planned to give us, but I didn't like to think about that. Talking about it didn't seem right. There wasn't a one of us, our gang, that even mentioned it, because we all liked the old man so well we wanted him to keep right on living forever. I forgot to tell you that's what Big Jim said to him back there in the cabin. Can you guess what Old Man Paddler answered? He said, "Live forever?" He kind of laughed. "That's exactly what I'm going to do, only I'm going to have to move out of this dilapidated old house first." I knew he didn't mean his weathered old log cabin with his clapboard roof. He meant a wrinkled, white-haired old house with long whiskers and gnarled hands that trembled. In a few minutes, we were all up in the mulberry tree, each boy on a limb, gobbling up whole handfuls of the juiciest, biggest, blackest mulberries you ever saw. When we'd eaten all we could, we started back toward home. We stayed a little longer than we should have, I guess, because with all the tall trees making so much shade, it was kind of spooky in the old swamp. But we decided to go through anyway because it was much closer that way. I'm going to save the next action for the next time I read. Have a great day, you guys.